Now this video, lords and ladies, will have unfortunately a fair bit of speculation for the simple reason that at this point in time, all of us are confined to the realm of speculation when it comes to Exodus. But I do have some ideas and theories about what's going on broadly, and I also wanted to share some of the content of the encyclopedia just because I think it's relevant. Now, my understanding is that Exodus as an IP, as a concept, was born of the fantasy and the mind of James Olen, the OG guy. Now, James Olen has a long history as a writer, especially for writing adventures. He was involved in a lot of pen and paper in the fantasy realm, but also in terms of managing games and this sort of thing. And I believe that Exodus is very much his brainchild. And more importantly, the evidence suggests, based on things that have been written about him of late in the last couple of years as pertains to Exodus, that he was very much in a state of semi-retirement, meaning he had no real plans of doing anything anymore in the games industry or elsewhere. But he did have a keen interest in producing something new in the sci-fi sphere. And it seems that Wizards of the Coast, by his own words, approached him and promised him, after he had told them to not interfere with the development process, that he could basically make his own game and his own IP. And so I think Exodus is very much a passion project that emerged from the desire of James Olen to create a new sci-fi universe, because frankly he was A, tired of fantasy, and B, didn't want to have to deal with the BS he had to deal with back in the day when it came to BioWare, the usual suspects, and that sort of thing. And so allegedly now has carte blanche to kind of do what he wants. But the thing is, despite this game nominally having been announced as a video game, and it is a video game obviously, there's a lot more going on to this universe than meets the eye, and there's a lot more going on to this IP than merely the game. And this is evidenced by a number of things. On the one hand, you have the rather large novel, part one of a duology called The Archimedes Engine, written by the famous sci-fi author Peter Hamilton. He was recruited as a mainstay consultant to both the game and the IP by Archetype Entertainment, by James Olen. Then you also have, and I think this is the more salient point, the tabletop, the pen and paper, for which 3 books are planned as of this current moment, and 2 books have been released. You have the Traveler's Handbook, which is mostly for players, and then you have the encyclopedia, some of the images you can see here, that basically describes the inhabitants of the Centauri cluster and what they're doing and their differences and what have you. And I have to say at the outset that whatever issues you might have with Archetype potentially, and otherwise in terms of your suspicions or what have you, these books, especially the encyclopedia, are exceptionally well done and exceptionally well manufactured. The art is very, very beautiful. The writing is quite good. The descriptions are quite good. And it's clearly born of a love for this universe that James Olen, of course, along with his team, are conceiving and working on, even as I speak. And therein lies the rub. Because unlike so many things out there, such as Mass Effect, which was announced as a video game, arrived as a video game, and stayed a video game, and many other IPs out there, they're really trying to cover all the bases with Exodus. Now, it's not clear to me if the impetus to create a tabletop game in addition to the video game was born of James Olen, or some kind of negotiation and or pressure put on him by Wizards of the Coast. But regardless of how it came to that, the fact of the matter is that Exodus, at least is intended, you don't know how it's going to turn out, to be gigantic, having potentially more novels than just the ones written by Peter Hamilton. Part 2 of the Archimedes Engine is arriving next year, which will then complete the duology. But I have no doubt that should this IP become successful, there will be more novels written by other sci-fi authors and other people who are interested in writing for this IP. And the whole thing appears to me to be a massive gamble, as in, we're going to put all our eggs in this basket and hope it pays off dividends. Because it's one thing to just sort of work on a video game, which is very expensive. I'm no expert and I have no insider knowledge here, but almost certainly a video game is more expensive to produce than a bunch of written material, if I had to guess. But this is just massive. So they're counting on a tabletop taking off and being popular. They're counting on novels being relatively popular, things people want to read in terms of fiction. And they're counting on a video game. And I think long term, they're hoping that this turns into essentially the next big sci-fi universe. This is not just a whimsy. This is really putting all their eggs in one basket. And I guess James Olen's sales pitch to Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro, so potent, so convincing, they bought into it hook, line, and sinker. Now, on the one hand, I think this is very laudable because obviously it's a passion project. There's so much going into this. And if you read through the encyclopedia and see the entries and all the detail amongst the different changelings and celestial races and tech and what have you, it's actually incredible. They are really putting everything they got into this. But with any great gamble come great risks, obviously. And I can't help but wonder at this stage that it might have been wiser, and just in terms of sheer strategy, in terms of marketing, more intelligent and more productive to first release the video game, see how well it does, and then, based on how well the video game sells and the success and overall popularity, then work on a tabletop RPG, then work on novels and what have you. Because it's unusual, although not unheard of, that people working in an IP might put out novels that are kind of connected to the IP in advance, or even a tabletop. But generally speaking, it's pretty rare. Generally speaking, they are separate entities. And if something comes along, it comes along later, after the IP in the video game realm is established. Or, in the case of, say, D&D, the classic, it has been long established as a tabletop pen and paper RPG, and then years, if not decades later, they decide to make video games based on said IP. So, it seems to me, on some level, Archetype is caught between a rock and a hard place, because they're trying to take on so much that they might be biting off more than they can chew. Now, again, this is pure speculation, but one could only surmise that they have a team working on these projects somewhat separately, meaning the tabletop and the video game, but nonetheless they're intertwined. And that's a lot of work to do. These player handbooks, encyclopedias don't write themselves. The art takes time and money to produce, and it's very time consuming. It's just a fact. And then you have the video game, which is probably being produced separately, but nonetheless connected on some level to the tabletop. And I'm not sure where you're supposed to go with that, because yes, it could work out, but you never know. These days, whatever the promise of a video game seems to be, and I'll be honest, I'm still very interested in Exodus. I have a vague hope in it, although I have seen signs that are concerning in terms of character design, as well as just the complete lack of information marketing that has taken place, or has not taken place, over this past year. But I'm still not optimistic, hopeful. We'll say hopeful that this will turn out to be a really cool sci-fi experience. And by the gods, they want it to be, clearly. They wouldn't put all this energy and effort into this paraphernalia for the tabletop, and I imagine also for the video game, and put out 2 chunkamunkus novels if they just were thinking, let's see how it goes. But I just don't know, because here's the thing. If the video game comes out and it flops, which is, we have to be honest with ourselves, most certainly a possibility. It's not guaranteed. It might not even be likely, because we have competent people, at least some competent people, working on the game, but it's a possibility that it flops, or more mildly does not meet sales expectations on the part of Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro. What is the tabletop going to do? It's also not going to be especially popular, because that needs to sell too. Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast are only interested in satisfying shareholders and making profit. And James Olen, I don't think, is primarily interested in that. He's interested in science fiction and fantasy to a lesser degree, and basically creating interesting, compelling fictional settings. But he still needs to satisfy his masters. And I don't use the word masters lightly, because even if he has somehow extracted a quote-unquote promise, whether it's written or simply verbal, from Wizards of the Coast and or Hasbro, that doesn't mean he's not being put under pressure to actually produce results and maybe even speed things up. We just don't know. So I worry that this project is so massive in scale and has so many dimensions, between novels being written, between the tabletop, and between a video game. And as I've said before, and I will stand on this point to be perfectly blunt, I think the video game should be and should have been the priority, because video games are just more accessible. You only require yourself to play. You can play it and instantly give feedback, and it tends to be the most fun experience. Now, sure, tabletop can also be just as fun, if not more so, but you need people to play with. You need people familiar and interested. And so in terms of the hierarchy of what should be worked on and which order, clearly the video game should have taken precedence at this current moment in time, and yet it doesn't appear to be the case. And yeah, it's annoying to talk about the lack of marketing and what's going on, but that's all we can do at this stage, speculate. Many of us are super eager to see more and want to play the game. It is one of those games, I say, that's on my top 3 list in the next 2 or 3 years that I really want to play. I'm not alone on this list, and we're hearing nothing but crickets. And yet at the same time, we're hearing a lot more than just crickets on the tabletop RPG front, which is asymmetrical to me and very weird, to be perfectly honest. But that's what I basically think. I think potentially Archetype might have bitten off more than they can chew. We'll have to see. And they're working on just too much at the same time. They might be inundated or overloaded with work. We don't know. And maybe, hopefully, the video game is very much separate from the tabletop in terms of energy and the amount of work being put into it. And of course, we can't really know that in terms of the details. But Archetype really needs to let us know, and they need to let us know soonish rather than later, because marketing is important. And unless this game is a total home run, meaning it comes out and it is amazing from top to bottom and has basically no weaknesses and just pushes all the buttons of what you want in a sci-fi action RPG, and then the word spreads and what have you, then they really need to do something in terms of the marketing. And even though I've purchased both accessories for the tabletop, it can't just be the tabletop. And as you've seen, very beautiful art, very well described, but still, the video game, Exodus, Become the Traveler, needs to be the primary thing they're working on, and we can only hope that's the case. Sorry for the lack of actual information. I wish I had that information. But I have a sneaking suspicion that there might be some kernel of truths in my speculation. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. And if you like my content and you like my takes, you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. And in addition, use the new hype feature. YouTube is so magnanimous, they have a hype feature now. So hype the video, be much appreciated. I imagine it really helps out the channel. Until the next time, take care. Bye-bye for now.